Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood with Hegwood Law Group, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning, I'm Kim Hegwood with Life Happens, and today I have a special guest, Eddie Orum. Eddie, welcome to the show this morning.
Thank you.
And Eddie, you do a couple of things that we're going to talk about this morning, but probably I think the biggest job that you have is that you're a caregiver. Is that correct?
I am a caregiver for my aunt who lives with me.
And so I was laughing and talking to someone earlier saying, that a lot of times you're a caregiver by default. You're not necessarily the caregiver by choice. And so how did you fall into caregiving?
Really both ways. I grew up in a very family caregiving culture where my grandmother was moved into our home her last years. My great aunt was moved in. And on the opposite end, my other grandmother actually brought in troubled teenagers as I was growing up. And I met people later who she'd brought in. And then I actually knew someone. I grew up with them. So I didn't really think about those kinds of cultural events. But once I became a caregiver and began to reflect, I saw how it all made sense.
Yeah, I grew up in one of those families as well, so I can appreciate that immensely. And so what kind of things did you do to really make sure that you were doing all the right things?
Well, several things happened, Kim, and one of the reasons I attended your session in another conference was because I am the nephew and there exists a son and daughter. So I actually had to learn some legal issues, how to make that happen. And once I moved my aunt in, I had to learn a lot about cognitive issues. I had to learn that my reality really is not priority, but her reality was my priority to become. And then I became associated with AARP just by incident. And because of that incident of going to a meeting and really meeting other caregivers, I learned more. Then I became a volunteer with AARP and have learned even more and attending different conferences that are offered in the elder community.
So do you think it's important for caregivers to really get a good education?
I think it's extremely important. I came to the table thinking that I had been an educator, I worked with at-risk students, I worked in the community, so I would have assumed that I had lots of information that would be helpful. But as I began working with ARP and going through their preparative care information, I learned that I was doing several things not as efficiently as I could have. From the different steps of ARP that I can talk about later. But you must take care of yourself. And part of taking care of yourself to be a good caregiver is to make sure you understand what's happening. Because again, it's not my reality. I'm a very reality oriented kind of person and very factual and want things to be in order. And I've learned through caregiving that things are not in order and I must be okay with that. And in order to be okay with that, I must understand why these things are happening and what is the next stage as well.
I think it's very important, for caregivers to kind of understand how things go, what to expect. We preach to caregivers all the time. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to sleep. You've got to, you have to do fun things. It's okay to do fun things when you're a caregiver. You have to kind of keep those things in mind. And so, but you said something briefly. You said you weren't doing things efficient enough. What did you mean by that?
First of all, I also have my mother who lives 3 miles down the road. And I had to learn how to have those conversations as to how to begin that talk of, I think we might have some issues. I had to learn to get more support, as in a team of support people, not always family, but always key people. And many times, the people that I work with have friends who want to be a part of their team. Of course, I had to learn some legal issues when it came to the complexities of being the nephew.
Yeah.
And I also had to learn, here again, as you said, take care of yourself. I remember actually leading a presentation and using the 5 steps about taking care of yourself. And I realized I was not taking care of myself, and actually reached out and received a therapist who I can actually talk with. And we have an ongoing arrangement because a lot of my boundaries had to be changed. And it's just so important to educate yourself. And that's an evolving process. You don't stop learning because the stages change.
I think that I think that most caregivers just kind of start going and things just kind of keep going, and it's kind of a snowball effect, and that most people don't realize that they've gotten to a position that they're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted, I'm stressed, I don't know what to do anymore. They've waited too long sometimes to get legal documents in place, so it's made it a lot harder. And so do you think that the work that you're doing with AARP has made you a better caregiver?
It's made me an extremely better caregiver in that we actually have resources that you can take a look at and actually learn from. There are other elder care resources in the community um, that I actually attend. And all of this has come from being a volunteer with AARP and looking at their resources. And I think most people actually perceived AARP as being an insurance company, or in my case, maybe a travel company. Um, but there's so many resources within AARP that you can take advantage of, from travel, from caregiving, legal aspects. Um, I would not be here today if not for AARP. Even the legal aspects, power of attorney, learning how to make sure that the trust and wills are in order. And a lot of this came through AARP that introduced me to other resources in the community.
When AARP first sent me my first thing in the mail telling me I could join, I kept thinking, I'm not old enough. I just turned 50. I'm not old enough. But when I realized that I could save money going out to eat, that was my win.
Right.
So let's talk about AARP, because they do a lot of important things for seniors. They're all about helping seniors. It's a really good company. You talked about the 5 AARP important steps for caregiving. So let's kind of take those one at a time and kind of walk through those. And so what's the first one?
The first one is actually preparing to have that conversation. As an example, when my mother had a wreck at one point in time, she thanked me several months later for not asking her to stop driving. And that's when I realized, well, this is not the time. Um, that conversation comes in different forms. It comes from the relationship you have, where you could have the conversation, to they're not ready for the conversation, to you may not be the person. You may need to get a faith leader. You may need to get a good friend to have that conversation with you. We then go into getting a very supportive team to understand that you really can't do it all by yourself. We want to do it by ourselves. It seems like it's more efficient if we just do it, but it's extremely important to bring in other people. In fact, one of my most important team members actually happened to be someone from California who my grandmother actually had brought into her home and saw my aunt as a big sister. And just her phone calls to give my aunt someone different to speak with, or just those phone calls to encourage me, were very helpful. My sister's a part of our team. My sister and I have an excellent relationship where we kind of divide up responsibilities in the family. I work with the elders, and she works with the nieces and the nephews and the children and the grandchildren. And so we extremely work together. So once you have that team, then you need to begin to have a plan. And I didn't have a plan. As you mentioned, my plan was just to deal with things as they came up. And I am very fortunate. My aunt at 87 years of age, birthday yesterday actually, um, can go up 3 flights of stairs without any problems. She was a swimmer, always ate vegetables and so forth. And as I learned about the test that you can take to see if the gene of cognitive impairment is in your family, I learned that it is in my family. And looking at her lifestyle, she simply just lived long enough to experience it, but an excellent lifestyle. Um, so my plan was different. It was basically knowing where to put things, coaching, which cup we're using. And luckily at this point, most of those things are still in effect. Once we have that plan, who can do what, when they can do it, and how they do it. And that plan changes, realizing that it changes, and we must be adaptable. We then look for community support, and looking for that community support is how I began to learn about care partners and taken through the conferences to help me. And there are a couple of things I was able to introduce to her because my uncle was a psychiatrist and she managed his office. So a lot of the things we can explore are things that we can talk about without being very specific as to why we're talking about it. And once you have that conversation, you have that support team, you have your plan, you have your community source resources, you then begin looking at a plan to take care of yourself. And here again, while leading a presentation and speaking to taking care of yourself, my eating habits were bad. My physical exercise was bad. My nerves were bad. And my sister gave me the advice to you can't always change other people's behavior, but you can always change how you react to their behavior. And I find that just kind of in my head. So you have a conversation, you have the support team, you set up the plan, you find community resources, and number 5, you take care of yourself.
And so, yes, that one's for us is very important. And so, because we find that, when the caregivers are coming into the office, they're stressed, they're drained, their health is not as good, and things like that. And sometimes you got to have those hard conversations with them about here's, if you don't take care of yourself, here's your reality, so it's hugely, hugely important. Do you think that AARP is doing a good job as far as educating caregivers? And for those that are listening, how do they go about finding the steps and the help that you got from AARP?
Well, first of all, I think AARP does a very good job of working with caregivers, as well as individuals who need tax help, as well as individuals who need to actually exercise. We have virtual online Tai Chi courses. It's even been helpful to me to pass on information in that I have a godson whose family is going through the same kind of thing with the mother-in-law and seeing some issues there, and the family's not necessarily in agreement. And through, again, AARP and watching one of your conferences, I was able to pass along some things that they might want to say to an attorney or ask of an attorney. It's even been interesting where I'm attending one of the conferences that AARP connected me with. I was able to see some signs and some definitions of certain cognitive issues and were able to pass that information on to another friend because they were experiencing some things with their father that they weren't quite aware of. And AARP Texas is very easy to locate. You can simply Google or go to the site aarp.org, Texas. You can find all sorts of different sites. You have a local number with AARP here. The people are excellent, informative. The resources are unbelievable. I keep resources around just to hand to other people. And I encourage everyone to, number 1, be a volunteer. Number 2, seek out the resources of AARP. And this is something I would not have said to you 2 years ago. I would have had, in fact, my vision was probably to volunteer with an education group. I never had any thoughts about volunteering with AARP, and I will not leave them alone at this point.
And so that's good. That's excellent information. I want to go back and something that you said, because I think this happens a lot. And you were talking about when it's time to have conversations. And you used the example that your mom had been in an accident and that wasn't the time to tell her she needed to stop driving. Did you find in your family that mom came to that decision herself, or did you have to have it at a later time that, because this happens a lot with seniors, as far, because it's more of a I can do this, I can do whatever I want to. It's more of a control. They have control of their lives, and that kind of thing. So did you find that in your particular circumstances that it came up with you, or did mom bring that particular subject up?
Actually, that was a very difficult conversation with both my aunt and my mother, because the women in my family are very strong, very independent, very proactive, and have always done it well. And that to me is part of why I give back, because I am who I am because of that. But with my mother, I actually began driving her and offering to be there, which she liked. And then she had another accident. And then that enabled us to have a conversation about driving, because the car was also expensive to repair. She did not get hurt, but it was kind of clear to both of us. So that worked well. With my aunt, she had began experiencing some issues, was not happy where she was. Her community actually helped me. I found that in her case, she was actually being assisted and her issues were being covered up, until at one point in time, I was actually asked to come by one of her best friends' home. My father was one of the leaders in the community. Once my father was deceased, I automatically was asked to take his place in the community and in the church. And so his friends actually had an intervention with me and said, we're seeing these things, but we now need to tell you. So it's different ways to have the conversation. With my aunt, I wanted to do an assessment. And I'd set up an assessment here in Houston, which was going to take several months. Her intent to let me know that there were no issues of concern, she volunteered to take an assessment in her hometown. And that assessment showed enough issues for me to begin the conversation with her.
Did you have her see a neurologist, a psychiatrist? Who did you have her scheduled with? What type of doctor?
Initially, I met with her general practitioner, who then referred us to a neurologist, who then offered the three main tests that we needed to have. And we were able to confirm some issues. Luckily, because she had 4 years prior had the test in her local hospital, but she was moved before any movement occurred with that assessment. But I had two assessments to compare. And that was also very helpful. So I must say that one of the things that helped me immensely was that I kept good notes. I kept information that was relevant. So when the time came to ask that my aunt be moved into my home, I had notes, telephone numbers, documentation. I'd worked through APS. I'd worked with attorneys. So all of that information was there.
And so, well, that's a lot of good information for our listeners, because it's really important for people to put things in place, to figure it out. Our goal is for us to do it ahead of time. And so to have those conversations with them that say, if you start to decline, what do you want us to do? So, holidays are coming up. It's an excellent time to have the conversation with people that says, hey, if you're starting to decline, what's the plan? What do you want us to do? How do you want us to pay for it? Where would you like to go if you can't stay home anymore? We encourage families to have these conversations. I always laugh and tell people in my family, we talk about everything. There's not a sacred subject ever that's not, usually at the kitchen table or whatever table we're eating at that time. But do you find that that you're having more and more difficult conversations, or just been the few that you've had that have been that you think AARP has helped with, or your education has helped you with?
I have learned to be extremely courageous because of my current experiences, to the extent that I have my children on my team, care team. And of course, my hidden agenda is to prepare them with what's going on now. So in the event that they need to have those conversations with me, they know how to have those, and we're prepared to have those. And I now see through AARP's assistance, resources, and helpful information that not only can I take advantage of, but that I can prepare others with, other families. my children. So we talk now about those financial issues. We talk now about, I live in a 3-story home, and that's not something that's going to be probably beneficial for quite some time down the future, hopefully. But the conversations have become easier once you have the information and the knowledge and the skills to do it. And we only have those conversations when we learn how to, we learn about the personalities. And you mentioned earlier that some people are caregivers because they have to. I've been in situations where someone was the only child, so they had to. I've been in a situation where someone lives in a different town and they really want to, so they have to look at other resources. So those conversations are important because we can't plan for the circumstances as well when they happen, as well as we can before they happen.
Yeah, that's very good information, because planning ahead is always, always, always the way to go. And so most definitely. So Eddie, do you have do people find you, or do they call to AARP in order to get on one of your workshops, or what you do through AARP?
They would contact AARP to ask for services, ask for presentations. And I'm one of the many people who AARP could send out to, or virtually. We're doing so many things virtually as we're doing this, and that's very helpful. Yeah. But AARP is extremely helpful, and their number is listed, and it's very easy to find them. In fact, their number is 877-333-5885. Or is that your number?
No, that's yours.
Okay, great.
And no, now that cell phones are out, area codes don't really matter anymore. But the 877 is a toll-free number. So, and for those that speak only Spanish, it's 888-971-2013. And so, do you find that caregiving has been a rewarding experience for you? Or is it just something that you feel that it's just something you were compelled to do?
Kim, it's certainly something that's rewarding to me because I'm caring for people that I truly care about. I'm caring for people who were immensely important in my growth. As an example, when I was in middle school, my aunt gave me a tennis racket when there were no tennis courts in my neighborhood, and very few courts I could even attend as an African American. I actually received my junior life-saving licenses because she was also a swimming coach. I spent my summers with my aunt and uncle. And it's also kind of interesting now that I remember that when I was in junior high, they asked me to be the trustee of their fund in the event that something happened to their children. And I kind of see now that I was always prepared for that. And my uncle, who's deceased, had actually put that in place. And I didn't think about any of those things when I became a caregiver, but I now find it very rewarding because I was simply raised to do these things. In fact, my father, and I'd be remiss to not say that my father was a very strong, compassionate male who had several conversations with me about the role of men and also helping to take care of their parents. In fact, my grandmother was sick at one point. It was assumed that my aunt should be the one to do it. And it was my father who said, no, it's both of our responsibilities. And when you look at my personal case, having a sister, and yet I'm the caregiver for my aunt. So I was fortunate to be raised in a home that had flexible roles, very strong and progressive. Even my grandparents are strong and progressive. So this is something that I think that I was probably brought up to do, was encouraged to do. Being a former retired educator, it's always kind of been in my line to take care of the community. Both of my parents worked with all sorts of events. So to me, it's just what I want to do and what I'm chosen to do.
Well, that's awesome, Eddie, because I have people that are, that come in the office and and they couldn't imagine doing anything else. And it sounds like you fall into that category, and then we find people that are just overwhelmed and, and think, I got this and I'm getting no help. And so one last question I want to ask you before we close today. How do you, with your experience and the training that you've had, how do you address the issue when it's one child doing the caregiving and the others won't help? Do you have any thoughts or information for those people that are doing that?
I do. And the first thing I would say is that it's not always the family who should be the ones giving the care. If you are leading a team, you have friends and neighbors who've always been important. You have different roles of people. You have, in my case, the faith leaders in the church. I grew up with three of my mother's best friends today, so they're still there. So it's not and it's also important to look at the relationship that your care receiver has with different people, because your care receiver is going to react and respond to different people. So I don't make the assumption that it should be just my family's responsibility. I make the assumption that I create a team of people who are going to be supportive to the plan that I've established.
Well, that's excellent advice. And so Eddie, I just appreciate immensely you coming on board. We have a lot of caregivers and, as clients, and there's a lot of caregivers out there as well. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. And I appreciate it immensely. Keep up the good work, because it sounds like you're doing an excellent job of being a caregiver. And so educating yourself, taking care of yourself. And so I'm super glad, and hopefully we'll get to see each other again.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast, as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.